large bin a week full to the brim. We have a new little baby, but I'm stunned, and we try. It's just extraordinary.
It's food, isn't it? It really adds up. I think the thing with Tippy is that, you know, she's right at the top of the mountain and we're all at the bottom of the mountain and looking up at her, and that's a bit annoying, isn't it? But it's certainly seeing what's possible, and she had some really good ideas in that story of the glass jars. I hadn't thought of that. But it's the more people are thinking like that, the more it'll drive demand for supermarkets. Why can't we have paper bags to put our bulk bin things in? You know, if you can take your wallet to the supermarket, you can probably remember to take one of those little fold-up reusable bags. It's about the same size.
Is it both mindfulness and a culture change? We've got to get over ourselves of having every date or lemon or banana or cucumber wrapped in a plastic. I mean, I can recall in the 70s where bulk bins would be kind of quite mainstream, you know, and you would actually take your own. It's starting to happen now, but bulk bins were a lot more used back in the 70s than they are now.
Oh, there's a very trendy bulk bin store in Ponsonby Central now, isn't there? What's it called? It's as though it's the new. They've just invented it.
Yes.
And making it fashionable. But certainly those ideas are coming back into.
And food waste is entirely valid, except we've just moved back to Auckland, and so that means that we've bought things. And the thing which has shocked me is the amount of packaging that comes around anything you buy. So you acquire, you know, a new washing machine, which does need to be protected in transport, but actually it's got more styrofoam than it has washing machine. And that's the bit that really worries me. So I can stop using as many plastic bags as I can. And one tip for you, we've bought reusable cling film. You know, you know how you cling film everything.
Got some.
And we've got the wax,
the beeswax
things.
That's really
I
good.
love those.
Got some.
But the reality is that actually that pales into insignificance when I think about, you know, by the time you've bought 4 items and each of them have got styrofoam around them and cardboard and strapping and plastic to tape them up, you've gone back to bloody jolly old square
We've
one.
had some fantastic feedback this afternoon. Julie's forwarded me this email here, a tenant story. Wallace says, Richard, I was a tenant in a house for 16 years in Whanganui. I never missed paying my rent and looked after the property. The landlords regularly told their friends what an exemplary tenant they had. In March of this year, a few days after my 72nd birthday, as house prices rose in the city, they told me they were going to sell the house. I asked if they would initially, for 90 days, advertise the house as having an excellent tenant who was happy to remain in the house. This request gave me no extra security, just the hope that it would attract the eye of a property investor rather than an owner-occupier. They refused the request as they felt it would limit their selling opportunities. He is 72.
I've heard so many stories like that. I've had it happen to myself.
There you go. Now, we have time for one more, I do think. This is a very interesting one. A story of a young Manawatu basketball player, Mosiah McDonald. Mosiah is Mormon, a good player who's in the national under-16s team, but he's been dropped from competing in an under-17s tournament because he can only make it to one of the 2 Sunday practice sessions. He can't make it to the Sunday morning one because he doesn't want to miss too much church. He has big basketball dreams. He wants to pursue sport in a US college. Briefly, what do you make of this decision?
To be honest, it sounded like he and the coach needed to have a bit more of a chat about it and try and figure out a compromise.
There's got to be a way. Michael?
Yeah, although the life is full of choices, and he's making a choice to do a particular thing, and there's a consequence to that. I mean, I think he should go and find a basketball team that doesn't practice on a Sunday morning. That would be my guess.
Maybe a Mormon basketball team?
Maybe a Mormon basketball team.
Okay, we'll put that out
Next
there.
big thing.
Rebecca White, Michael Monaghan, thank you.
Thank you.
Tō te mara e hoa mai hei kōrero, kei te haere, hei kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight, thousands of nurses walk off the job and onto the streets. In their first strike in 30 years, we join them to ask, what do you want? Thai authorities released the first footage of the wild boar soccer team since their dramatic rescue from the caves. It shows the boys in good health and in good spirits as they wave to the camera. Bless them, it's not coming home after all, unless football's home is Croatia or France. Sorry, English fans, low blow. We look at the World Cup semi-final. The Conservation Minister isn't impressed a mining exploration permit has been granted within a marine mammal reserve. Why was it? And Rose Renton is found guilty of offensive behaviour. All of that and more coming up on Checkpoint.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. More than 9 hours into the unprecedented strike by nurses, hospitals say they're coping well. Up to 30,000 nurses walked off the job at 7 o'clock this morning and won't be back until early tomorrow morning. The Chief Medical Officer at Wellington's Capital and Coast DHB, John Tate, speaking for all senior staff, is thanking nurses who did turn up to work and also their union for helping plan cover for patients.
It's important to thank the members of NZNO who have made themselves available to work and to provide the life-preserving cover. And we're also very grateful for the cooperation and support from NZNO who have been assisting with the LPS cover.
Dr Tate says hospitals have had more staff and volunteers working today than planned, and for most hospitals occupancy levels have been at expected levels. This nurse, Katrina Hopkinson, says nurses won't give up their battle for better pay.
The time is now, and we'd rather be on our wards doing our work today and not out here on the picket line. We want a fair and reasonable offer that we can accept and get on with our job.
A Wellington nurse, Katrina Hopkinson, on the picket line outside Wellington Hospital today. The woman convicted today of throwing rat poison at Nelson MPs stand by her actions. Rose Renton was found guilty of offensive behaviour after a complaint by Nick Smith she rubbed rat poison on him. Dr Smith, who was at the time Minister for the Environment, said 2 protesters rubbed rat poison on him while he was at his National Party caravan at the Nelson Market. Ms Renton said outside court she stands by what she did, which was a symbolic protest about large-scale poison drops in wildlife areas.
On one hand, I get charged with being offensive, yet our environmentalists are violating the entire length of New Zealand was 1080.
Rose Renton. Dr Smith has welcomed the decision. He says people are entitled to express their opinions, but throwing and rubbing poison on another person has been rightly confirmed by the court as offensive behaviour. A union is calling Nestlé's announcement that 55 of its Auckland workers will be made redundant a bolt from the blue. Nestlé is selling several of its confectionery brands to private equity firm Quadrant, which will see manufacturing operations for these products move to Levin. E2's industry coordinator for manufacturing and food, Phil Knight, says the union and its members are in shock.
We've actually asked that specifically of Nestlé in the last 6 months, and we were assured no, there's no plans to do anything like that in New Zealand. So that certainly provided us with shock. It's just more and more of the same, where global corporations come into New Zealand and they invest and they employ people for a while, and then they make decisions to restructure, and it's very much at the cost of people's livelihood.
Phil Knight. The Conservation Minister says the mining exploration permit granted off the Taranaki coast wouldn't have been approved if it went across her desk. The permit, granted to Iron Sands Offshore Mining Limited, falls 2 nautical miles within a marine mammal sanctuary that's home to the critically endangered Maui dolphin and the rare southern right whale. Eugenie Sage says she's disappointed, but it's the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment's decision to make. She says if exploration leads to a mining application, she would then expect the Department of Conservation to get involved. A utilities watchdog has had a 20% rise in electricity and gas billing complaints in the past year. In its annual report, Utilities Dispute says more than 5,000 people have sought its advice at that time. In more than 60% of the disputes related to billing, with customer service the next highest area for dissatisfaction. The search for a man the police are seeking over a shooting in Invercargill almost 2 weeks ago has widened to cover the whole country. A 52-year-old man is recovering after being shot on Kelvin Street on June the 30th. A warrant was issued for Anthony Miles Tamaiti Watkins a week ago, but the lead detective Chris Lucy says they're no closer to catching Mr Watkins, who's believed to be travelling north. Mr Lucy says 6 staff based in Invercargill are working full-time on the search. He says anyone who's seen Mr Watkins needs to come forward.
I'm not sure why we haven't caught him. I would have liked to thought we could have by now, but he's just gone to ground. He's evading our usual means of capture. If you see him, please let us know. And look, even if he's listening, pop into any station and hand yourself in. We can certainly sort it out from here.
Detective Chris Lucy. The British man who was poisoned by the Novichok nerve agent has spoken briefly to officers trying to find the source of the agent. Charlie Rowley, who's 45, is no longer in a critical condition but remains in Salisbury District Hospital. His conversation with the police comes a day after the hospital says he had regained consciousness after he and his partner were poisoned 12 days ago. Dawn Sturgis died early this week. The police are investigating a possible link to the case of Russians Sergei and Yulia Skripal, who were poisoned with the same substance in nearby Salisbury in March. It's 5:05. Sport. The Croatian football captain Luka Modric says the lack of respect from England fans, press and pundits helped motivate his side to reach the World Cup final. Croatia won this morning's semi-final 2-1 in extra time, with Modric again instrumental for Croatia. He says his side were determined to prove their doubters wrong.
English journalists, pundits from television, they underestimate Croatia tonight. That was huge mistake, and all these words from them we were reading and we were saying, okay, we will see today who will be tired.
Luka Modric and Croatia take on France in Monday morning's final in Moscow. The Highlanders will be without 3 All Blacks for their final regular season match against the Melbourne Rebels in Dunedin this weekend. Already qualified for the playoffs, the Southerners need to give fullback Ben Smith, halfback Aaron Smith and number 8 Luke Whitelock a night off due to their compulsory All Black stand-downs. The assistant coach Mark Hammett agrees it's not ideal timing against a Rebels side with everything to play for.
They've got the opportunity to make history of being the first Rebels team to make the playoffs. That they're a big side, they're hard running. Some of their unpredictability makes them really dangerous. So we're under no illusions, taking a lot of respect into this game.
Mark Hammett. And the NRL is proposing a revamp of the International Rugby League calendar over the next 4 years. The proposal includes an Oceania Cup involving New Zealand, Tonga, Samoa and Fiji, and a Four Nations tournament involving New Zealand, Australia, Tonga and Samoa, while talks have begun for an International Nines tournament at the end of the 2019 season. That's the news.
Nurses strike.
Certainly a number of patients I've been speaking to recently where I work have been in full support of this action.
Croatia strikes back.
Aimed in beyond, Mandzukic and fired home by Perisic.
And Trump makes the first strike.
You're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia.
Morning Report, driving your morning news with Guy Nespiner and Giles Beckford from 6 a.m.
Then on 9 to noon, the fascinating DNA capturing techniques being used in the quest to find Nessie. And after 10, the larger-than-life former Kiwi detective Sergeant Al Lester, who spent 31 years on the force. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including the central North Island high country. Fine spells and isolated showers, areas of fog tomorrow morning. Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, fine at first, a few showers developing this evening and becoming more frequent tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, cloudy periods and isolated showers, clearing from Wairarapa by evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington, increasing fine spells today, however cloud increasing tomorrow with showers from afternoon. Marlborough and Nelson, fine and cloudy periods. Bulla to Fiordland, mainly fine today but cloudy periods and isolated showers north of the glaciers, widespread showers tomorrow. Canterbury to Southland, mainly fine with morning frosts, and the Chatham Islands, fine spells and a few showers today. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. We begin tonight with the nurses' strike, which began at 7 o'clock this morning and will last for 24 hours, almost 3 decades after the last such strike. Remember, the New Zealand Nurses Organisation recommended acceptance of the revised deal DHB's put to them, total value over time $500 million. Their membership voted no, and today thousands of those members marched. We joined them with our cameras. You can watch this story now live on Facebook, on Freeview Channel 50 and on Sky TV Channel 83, or later on the Checkpoint website, or of course you can listen to it on the radio. Later, our health correspondent Karen Brown surveys the day across the country. It appears to have passed relatively smoothly so far. But with such a large offer being declined over the top of the union's recommendation, why did nurses strike and what do they want? The best way to find out is to ask them directly, so our cameraman Nick Monroe and I joined the thousands marching through downtown Auckland to do exactly that.
Kia ora, ko Marian mohi toku ingoa.
Really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
We're in Aotea Square, downtown Auckland. It's approaching midday and the nurses have marched up Queen Street. More from the march itself shortly. But first, some figures. How much are you paid, roughly?
I'm on roughly about $27 an hour. I have a sister that's working in a factory line that's on $30 an hour. So, and she's not qualified whatsoever. I've had to work hard for my qualifications. I have to work hard with placements. I give of myself freely before I become a nurse. So I've worked hard and I'm just not being compensated.
Under the offer, Marian would have received 3% this year, 3% next August and 3% in August 2019. But she's new and that's on a relatively low base. How long have you been a nurse for?
I've been nursing now for 5 years. So I'm only a junior in the ranks, but I'm already seeing all the discrepancies that are out there. And it's putting me off, and I'm thinking, gee, is there something better? But I want to be a nurse, I want to be helping, but I'm finding the government's not finding a way to do that.
The government, of course, and the DHB say this is fair, this is substantial. We are listening and we are prepared to write cheques in response to what we're hearing. The government's saying, hey, there's $500 million on the table. We are recognising you.
No, too late. We want it now. We want it now. Too late.
Margaret has been a nurse for 24 years. Angela, who we meet later, even longer. Why are you on strike, Angela?
I'm on strike because the same thing is happening today as happened 28 years ago. We don't have safe staffing, we're not being paid properly, and our patients are daily at risk.
Were you a nurse 28 years ago?
I was a nurse 30 years ago.
And did you go on strike the last time nurses went on strike?
Yes, I did. And today shows us that we're in exactly the same position and we're fighting for exactly the same reasons. And the number of people here shows you that we've got the same causes.
What are the most important reasons?
It's about safety. It's all about safety.
And safety means what? Well, staffing levels first and foremost. And that means recruitment and retention. And that means money. It's an inexact survey, of course, with a loaded sample, but that theme recurs all morning. I've spoken to about 20 nurses, maybe slightly more, during the course of the march, and they all say, yes, we want more money, but the point they overwhelmingly return to is we need more staff.
We're tired, we're shattered, we can't cope any longer. We're underfunded, we're under-resourced.
I think the DHBs and the government have actually said they agree with you. All of those things are true, and they put $500 million on the table. So what is it you want now? What more? What will make the difference?
The difference is the conditions, John. Most of us have said, you know, pay is really important. We're way behind other people, but we work in an environment now where constantly we are being provided with short staffing. They need to find those nurses and they need to pay us fairly because they're leaving in droves. They're going to Australia, they're going elsewhere where they feel valued and paid fairly for what it is they do.
What is it you're after? Why are you on strike?
The nurses on the wards, I work in critical care, so we're well staffed, but the nurses on the wards are really struggling with safe staffing levels. On night shifts, some nurses are being asked to look after 10 patients in a night, and that is incredibly unsafe, both for nurses and patients.
We've gone back in time a bit. Before the march has even started, we're assembling on Fort Street. But over the course of the morning, this will be repeated over and over again. What's most important to you? What is it that you most want from the DHBs?
Safer staffing.
Why are you here today?
I just want to support better staffing and better pay for the nurses because we totally deserve it.
How long have you been a nurse for?
4 years now.
Why did you become a nurse?
My nana's a nurse, my nana's mum's a nurse, my mum is a nurse, but I just wanted to be there to help people. And that's the real passion behind nursing, is we just want to be there to help.
And that's the issue here. The pay round, which is very personal, is now conflated with the greater good. Public health, patients, safety, those big words. On the one hand, nurses want more money. On the other hand, they want more nurses. How long have you been a nurse for?
30 years.
And why are you on strike today?
We're striking for our patients, and we're also striking for better pay.
The government is saying, hey, $520 million, admittedly over 3 years, is a hell of an increase. What more are you hoping for?
Well, a part of that increase they're saying is for nurses, extra nurses. That's $38 million allocated to that. That equates to 2%, which is basically one nurse, not even one nurse, per ward, which is nothing because the wards are grossly understaffed anyway.
Are they?
Oh, you've no idea. No idea.
Tell me about it. How does that manifest itself? How is that seen?
I think it's seen in that we just can't do our jobs properly. We're all professionals. We all care about our patients. And if there's not enough of us, we can't actually look after them how we would like to look after them.
And on it went. Colleen has done 25 years and worries that her beloved profession is not appealing to young people as it once did. The government's saying, hey, we're putting $500 million on the table.
I know, but they're buying airplanes and things as well.
So what more do you want? What would make a difference?
I just wanted safe staffing more than the fair pay. A bit more pay just to encourage people. You know, nursing students coming in with 3 years student loan and getting as much as a top grade healthcare assistant. It's not fair.
Fight back! When patients' rights are under attack! Stand up! Fight back!
There was a sense this morning of accrued frustration, mounting anger, years of being underwhelmed now adding up. A new government has inherited old grievances.
Well, at the moment, we haven't even been given a deal which will take us back in real terms to what we were getting in 2004. So if they could at least match that so that we haven't been taking a pay cut for the last 15 years, that'd be a start.
So why are nurses striking now? Why weren't you striking 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago?
I think at this point it's become a crunch point. So every year we've been taking a pay cut and every year we get further and further away from having living pay and good working conditions. We've got less nurses on the floor. I think it's just become a crunch point.
Crunch points. There are nurses here today that weren't born when nurses last went on strike. $500 million on the table and a government that largely agrees with them in principle, but not yet clearly in persuasive enough terms.
They need to find those nurses and they need to pay us fairly because they're leaving in droves. They're going to Australia, they're going elsewhere where they feel valued and paid fairly for what it is they do.
I'm looking after the community, but who's looking after me? Who's looking after my family? So it's really not fair.
Nurses marching through Auckland late morning and around lunchtime. Nick Monroe, the cameraman, doing a stunning job there. Meanwhile, district health boards say emergency departments around the country relatively quiet today despite the strike. Hawke's Bay Hospital did have to call on an emergency agreement to get 4 extra nurses on wards today. But other DHB said they sent volunteers home because more had come to work than planned. Jim Green is the chief executive of Gisborne's Taranaki DHB. He said the region's GPs had helped by taking some pressure off the hospital today.
It's very clear that that they are responding well to being able to provide care for people within the community and taking pressure off the hospital. That's very much appreciated, and I'm sure for all the people that are receiving care there, that's very reassuring for them as well, because we know the importance of general practitioners and staff and their staff in people's lives and making sure that they are safe. So while I would absolutely say it's a major event for us and obviously is not something that we would want to have, and we look forward to getting resolution of this so we can prevent that in the future, but I do have to say that we've had that degree of cooperation and support from the nurses and from the other members of staff to be able to get through this difficult time.
Jim Green from Tairāwhiti in Gisborne. DHB spokesperson Helen Mason told a media conference this afternoon it will be back at the bargaining table tomorrow with the NZNO.
Whilst today our focus is very, very strongly on patient safety and staff safety, we do need to start to think about how we move into the future. The facilitator from the Employment Relations Authority did make her recommendations to DHBs and NZNO. Those have been made to the two parties, and DHBs are going to be considering those recommendations, and we will be making contact with NZNO to talk about the recommendations and to agree a path forward.
DHB spokesperson Helen Mason. If you are a nurse who was on strike, if you were a patient in hospital during the strike today, we'd love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we'll have more on the strike after 6 o'clock tonight. It's 20 minutes past 5. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. The world has had its first look at the 12 Thai schoolboys and their football coach since their extraordinary rescue from the Tam Luang caves. The last of the 13 were brought to safety by an international team of divers on Tuesday night. What a team. And as Zach Fleming reports, they appear to be in remarkably good health and in even better spirits.
Waving to the world. All 12 members of the Wild Boars football team and their coach safely in their hospital beds in Chiang Rai, looking thinner but in relatively good health given their 17-day ordeal. In quarantine, a glass divider separates them from their parents. It's a precaution as doctors say they may be suffering from histoplasmosis, a fungus infection caused by nutrients from bat and bird droppings. 2 of the boys also have pneumonia caused by conditions deep inside the cave where the team had sat for 9 days before they were found, sitting on a ledge in a dark, half-flooded chamber with dwindling oxygen. Doctors say each child lost an average of 2 kilograms whilst in the cave, but today they appear happy as they make the peace sign for the camera and check their mobile phones. Meanwhile, more details have emerged revealing just how perilous the rescue mission was and how close it came to disaster. Thai authorities revealed water pumps draining the cave had failed after the last child was evacuated, forcing more than 100 workers inside the cave to rush to the exit as water began to re-flood the cave. And the Thai Navy SEALs released new footage overnight showing the complexity of the rescue and how the boys were taught to dive when some couldn't even swim. Each boy wearing a diving cylinder was tethered to an adult diver while sedated. The boys were submerged for much of the journey, but were carried on bright red stretchers whenever they entered areas of dry ground. Each child left the cave strapped to a stretcher and wearing a breathing mask. A multinational team of Thai Navy SEALs, police, volunteers and the military have emerged as the heroes of the recovery mission. A team of 7 Australian police and Navy divers spent 75 hours in the cave, ferrying 20 tonnes of equipment, including radios, oxygen and air cylinders and medical equipment. Thailand's Prime Minister, along with Mission Commander Naronsak Osotananakorn, thanked the world for their support.
Today, Thais, Team Thailand, government officials and the private sector, as well as the media and the world's moral support, we managed to do something we've never expected we could do. It's a world first.
The rescue continues to dominate headlines in Thailand, newspapers splashing the headline "Mission Accomplished" across front pages.
I'm glad. I'm glad as one of all the Thai people who were concerned for their safety. So I'm happy to learn they're safe now.
Thank you so much for getting the boys out. I'm so proud of the former Navy SEAL who sacrificed his life.
The team is expected to spend at least 10 more days in hospital. Thai officials say the happy ending has put the Tam Luang cave firmly on the world map, and plans are well in place to develop it into a tourist destination. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Let's go to, the Wild Boars were invited to the soccer. They're not going to be able to go, and nor, bless them, England. Croatia has dashed England's dream of competing on the biggest stage in world football. Their light-footed progress through the early rounds ended in a semi-final, beaten 2-1 by Croatia, who now face France in the final. The young England team had been largely unfancied at the start of the tournament, even quietly by many of their own fans. Yes, the English had dared to hope, but anything more than hope seemed fanciful. Still, how close they came in the end. But beaten by Croatia, population smaller than New Zealand, who are having their own fairy tale ride to their first ever World Cup final. The BBC's Richard Conway picks up the action.
England started this game brightly, Dele Alli running at the Croatian defence and forcing a free kick on the edge of the penalty area after just 5 minutes. It was Kieran Trippier who stepped up to take it.
Trippier with the free kick, over, it's in! It's in! Kieran Trippier has given England the lead in the 5th minute, right in the top right corner. Brilliant!
Harry Kane nearly doubled the lead, but wasted a great opportunity after being played through. However, England lacked fluency in the second half, and Croatia's Ivan Perisic soon punished them.
Don't want to get Rakitic and Modric involved in the game. First I'll go with the cross, and it's into the net! Perisic has scored it!
With England on the back foot, Croatia had a chance to settle it. 90 minutes failed to find a winner. Into extra time, and John Stones nearly gave England the lead again, only to see his header cleared off the line. But then, with just minutes left to play, Croatia struck, this time decisively.
That bounces back into the box, chance here, it's scored! It's 2-1 to Croatia, Mandzukic from
2-1 in the end, and Croatia will now meet France in Sunday's final. It was left to England manager Gareth Southgate to express his pride in his team's achievements.
I'm remarkably proud of a group of players that have really advanced. I think the reaction of the supporters to them at the end, compared to 2 years ago, tells them that first and foremost, experiences with England can be positive, that the country are very proud of what they've done and the way that they've played.
Striker Harry Kane, meanwhile, reflected on the small margins that decided the game.
It was a 50-50 game, you know, Croatia played well. In extra time, I thought we stepped it up again. We had a couple of chances. But look, it's small margins in big games, it's small margins, and they had a ball that fell their way at the end there, and they put it away.
Outside the stadium, England fans who had travelled in hope of seeing their team make it to their first World Cup final since 1966 also praised the players' efforts.
Devastating, but it is what it is. Very sad. However, we went a lot further than we ever thought we would.
Absolutely gutted. Gutted. Couldn't answer it anymore.
Can I say it's really upsetting that England lost? It was really close, but you know, next time.
I'm not happy. The girls are all upset. Maybe next time.
England then fall one game short of making the final, but they will return home with their heads held high after going further in this tournament than many expected.
Yes, that is very true. Richard Conway reporting. Meanwhile, the party started early for Croatian Kiwis as their team romped into the World Cup final for the first time in history. And as the celebrations continue, Croatians here already have their eye on Monday morning, New Zealand time, when they want to make history again. Rowan Quinn, our Rowan Quinn, visited both camps in Auckland.
For passionate fans at the Croatian Cultural Society in Te Atatu, the early start was worth it.
We had music, we had guitar, we had everything. Večeras je naša pjesma, večeras se vino pije.
Vladimir has been in New Zealand for more than 20 years, but when it comes to football, his heart's with Croatia.
Nothing happened, you know, until the second half, and then our guys started to play good, and then scored the goal, 1-1, yes, yes.
And Vladimir reckons that anxious start was actually a secret weapon.
Because I know mentality of our people, you need to push them a little bit, give them an injection, and they start to play good. So that was good injection.
Knowing that might have helped the nerves of 10-year-old Jarvis.
When England scored the first goal, I got really scared. But when Croatia came back, I knew they were going to win.
His dad, Vedran, says it was great to see everyone going crazy.
We were just jumping up and down. We were so excited. It was so great, and we supported our country, and we're so proud to be a Croatian Kiwis.
Meanwhile, on the other side of town, 4 minutes in and an England goal, things were looking very rosy for now. Turns out football wasn't coming home. Jubilation gave way to anxiety and a few choice English insults for the ref. Even the Queen couldn't save them, and in the end there was nothing but politeness for their rivals, a somewhat demure round of applause. The fans were deflated but proud of the young side.
Man, we had a great run in the competition. I can't knock the boys, so respect, you know. And yeah, I'm gutted, but there's prospect for the future.
Croatia did well. Like, you got to give it to them. If they can go and do it in extra time, we didn't have enough. We just didn't have enough. It was one step too far.
And though Croatians here may be celebrating, like Branko, they're already looking forward.
And this is so exciting. We're playing a final, and yeah, against France, they was playing really beautiful football. And this World Cup, this is a really exciting match. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm glad.
I Tamaki Makaurau mō Checkpoint, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Thanks for being with us on Checkpoint. So much feedback coming in tonight. This from Bronwyn, a registered nurse of 40 years. Hi, John. I was on strike today and I was in the last strike 30 years ago. It's time for New Zealand to face up to this. You cannot run an effective healthcare service by exploiting a group of workers. Hi, re-nurses strike. Get this, John. The NICU at Christchurch Women's Hospital had more nurses on duty under the life preservation requirements. Ironic, really. Their normal staffing is less due to lack of staff under normal operations, says Sarah. Sarah, that is extraordinary. We're going to make some calls and try and check that. People were telling me today, actually, the cover for their wards was greater than the normal roster. So that's what you're telling us. Hi, John. A friend of mine is a nurse who moved here from Perth early last year. She was saying 2 months ago she quit because even back in Perth, she paid her cleaner more than nurses are paid here. Nurses are paid more in Australia due to the strong unions. I hope New Zealand was better than that. And Rachel in Waikato says, why didn't the nurses strike under the national government? Makes you wonder, perhaps Labor values them more, so chances are better. Thank you for your feedback. A lot of it coming in tonight, 29 to 6. Coming up on Checkpoint, the Conservation Minister isn't impressed. A mining exploration permit has been granted within a marine mammal reserve. Plans for a multi-million-dollar accommodation complex in the Fiordland National Park irks locals and environmentalists, and Rose Renton is found guilty of offensive behaviour. Business next, but before it all, Katrina with the headlines.
A senior clinician is thanking nurses who turned up to work today and their union for helping plan cover for patients. Up to 30,000 nurses walked off the job at 7 o'clock this morning and won't return to work until early tomorrow. Hospitals say they're coping well so far. The Conservation Minister says a mining exploration permit granted off the Taranaki coast wouldn't have been approved if it had crossed her desk. The permit granted to Iron Sands Offshore Mining Limited falls 2 nautical miles within a marine mammal sanctuary that's home to the critically endangered Maui dolphin and the rare southern right whale. Eugenie Sage says if exploration needs to a mining application, she would expect the Department of Conservation to get involved. The woman convicted today of throwing rat poison at Nelson's MP Nick Smith is standing by her actions. Rose Renton was found guilty of offensive behaviour after the MP claimed she rubbed rat poison on him while he was at the Nelson market. Outside the court, Ms Renton said her actions were a symbolic protest about the large-scale poison drops in wildlife areas. Dr Smith says while people are entitled to an opinion, throwing poison on another person has been rightly confirmed by the court as offensive behaviour. A union is calling Nestlé's announcement that 55 of its Auckland workers will be made redundant a bolt from the blue. Nestlé New Zealand announced today it's selling some of the country's favourite sweet brands and manufacturing of the products will move to Levin. Inetu coordinator Phil Knight says the union and its members are in shock. A multi-million-dollar accommodation complex proposed for Fiordland has caused a stir among environmentalists. The Department of Conservation publicly notified the application earlier this year. Forest and Bird Otago and Southland Regional Manager Sue Maturin has questioned why the lodge couldn't be built outside the Fiordland National Park. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Isn't that a lovely phrase? Caused a stir.
Whatever that means.
Yes. We'll find out later. We'll have more on that stir a bit later on in the programme. I don't know what's going on. What are we doing here? Are we going to business? Yes, we are. Turning to business news now with Patrick O'Mara. 60 of the country's leading businesses have banded together to fight climate change. Patrick, I saw Ngāi Tahu was involved in this too. Time to walk the talk.
Yeah, indeed, John. This Climate Leaders Coalition has 60 firms which have signed up, and as you point out, Ngāi Tahu is one of them. We've got Z Energy, Fonterra, Spark, Westpac, Freightways, Ports of Auckland, Kiwi Rail. So some big names in there, putting their names behind it. And obviously,
Patrick, Yes. They can put their names behind it and they can hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but what are they actually going to do? Does this mean anything?
Well, yeah, well, it does, John. I mean, it's partly a support group, so like an AA meeting in some ways for these guys. Because what they'll do is they've all got internal targets that they've put out there already. Like for example, Fonterra has got a 30% gross emissions reduction in emissions by 2030, and by 2050 they've committed themselves to net carbon zero emissions. So these targets are there. They're also going to share ideas of how they're going to go about it. So I wouldn't discount it, though you could argue that, look, business have known about climate change for a very, very, very long time. We could go back to the 1990s now when the government put out its first climate change policies in this area. But look, some of it, I mean, I guess the question's going to be, how do we monitor these firms to make sure they're doing what they say they're doing? And partly the argument has always been, particularly from environmentalists, is that what are they doing which is more than just business as usual?
Yeah.
Now, some of them are going to be, as we saw with Zen Energy last week, it committed $1.5 million into putting more into forestry. Now, again, some would argue, actually, that's not really enough. You can't just do that. So these firms are going to have to back it up by real reductions in emissions. And if we take someone like Fonterra, for example, they have a number of coal-fired plants which they use for drying milk and producing product because there's no gas in the South Island. So how are they going to go and wean themselves off that, for example? Now, they can't say that they will be, that by the time these targets come to the end of their targets of 2030 and 2050, that they will say that they will stop burning coal entirely, but they're looking for ways at how they might reduce them. So, I mean, you're right to be sceptical. We want to make sure that they do it, but you'd argue, John, that it is good business sense.
Yeah.
More and more people are worried about these sort of things, and firms should be playing their part.
They should be, and I'm all for it if they do it. Yeah, by golly. Patrick, investor confidence in financial markets and the way they run is apparently still solid. This is interesting, isn't it? Because we're seeing a lot of surveys. We seem to be almost flooded by them. But actually, investor confidence in markets is a sort of self-fulfilling thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and we'll look at for this one's been running now since about 2013, I think, looking back at the ones that we've seen. And there has been confidence has remained fairly stable for most of it. So 62% of respondents are confident, slightly down from last year, but statistically not that much different. And look, you can see the reasons why. The share market, for example, has been on a tear. So a lot of confidence in our companies. Interest rates have been low. They've all been making lots of profits, and that means more dividends. So why wouldn't you be confident? And also the economic backdrop is looking very good. I guess and you wouldn't be surprised, those who are knowledgeable about markets are even more confident than others. But from the FMA's point of view, I guess their concern lies in those who are not showing that level of confidence in investment markets. And they tend to be the young, they tend to be Pacific, they tend to be women. And they have got, I guess, in some ways, a lot of work to do to convince these people that markets are a good bet. The returns are very good, but in fact, they're better than in some areas like term deposits. But what you tend to find is those who don't have confidence in markets tend to go with what they feel more comfortable with. And that is something like term deposits where you're earning very little on your money. They're not convinced yet that putting them into stock markets, for example, are a good thing. And it's partly the language that we talk about. It's their understanding of things such as a risk return and the trade-off between those things. And when it comes to things like property, they probably put their money into that. The other issue that they're looking at too, from the FMA's point of view, is their role as regulator. Now, only something like 4 out of 10 New Zealanders really understand the FMA's role in that area, the Financial Markets Authority. They're not so worried about that. What they're more worried about is that they're just seeing a little bit of lack of confidence in the regulation of the market. They're putting it down to some of the things that we've seen so far this year, particularly the CBL insurance collapse, Probably Fletcher Building's performance, which really hit the headlines, and possibly the Royal Commission over in Australia into banking, which is what we've seen over there, is how they were ripping off customers. That's probably shaken a little bit of confidence there.
Yeah, deservedly so in some respects. What's happened on the markets today, Patrick?
Down 16 points, John. We've fallen below that 9,000 mark that we'd enjoyed for the last few days.
Basking in it, Patrick.
Yeah, but obviously that trend we've just seen in the last few days, actually, the markets had been floating down. So they're now down below the 9,000 mark, down 16 points or 0.2% at 8,985. On the currencies, let's start off with the British pence, just in recognition of that brave English effort. Not good enough for Croatia, but they got there in the end. It's buying 51.2 British pence, 67.6 American, and 91.5 Australian, John.
Patrick O'Mara, thank you very much indeed. Let's cross-cook straight from where Patrick is and head west, I guess. Nelson woman Rose Renton says she was prepared to risk conviction in order to highlight the conversation around the use of poison in wildlife areas. After a 2-hour deliberation, Ms Renton was today found guilty of offensive behaviour and fined $400 for rubbing rat poison on Nelson MP Nick Smith at the city's Saturday market last year. Our reporter Tracy Neal was in court.
The events unfolded last September during an aerial poison drop at a Nelson wildlife sanctuary. Knowing that the police's attention would be there, Ms Renton and another went to the Saturday market and threw rat poison at Nelson's MP. Nick Smith, who at the time was the Environment Minister, claimed it was rubbed in his face. Ms Renton maintained she only ever touched him lightly. Justice of the Peace David White said in sentencing today that Ms Renton's argument came down to this.
And the defendant contended that her behaviour was a symbolic gesture and the exercise of her right to freedom of expression.
It happened at the busy Nelson market, where Dr Smith holds constituent meetings every Saturday. Mr White says the offending directly impacted on public order and had several aggravating features.
The offending was premeditated and deliberate. Real poison was used in a public marketplace. There was little regard for the risk to the safety and health of the persons gathered there.
Mr White spent considerable time analysing the meaning of what constitutes offensive behaviour. It was a point challenged early on by defence lawyer Sue Gray, who carried out much of the legal work for free. Speaking outside court, she said it was a disappointing decision, but it hadn't been futile.
What it's done is it's highlighted some really important issues, both about police processes, the risk of political interference, the lack of adherence with the Solicitor General's guidelines, so a lack of protection for members of the public who are charged by the police.
She says it also highlighted the need for informed public decision about the way poisons are used. Ms Renton says she stands by what she did.
It's tiring to have to front something, but sometimes you have to be that person and stand up, and I'm passionate about nature and keeping our land clean, and 1080 and Broda is not a way to do that. So I stand by what I did, and the court have made their decision today.
She concedes her actions threatened the safety of people around her, but did not think it compared with large-scale poison drops.
In one hand, I get charged with being offensive, yet our environmentalists are violating the entire length of New Zealand with 1080.
Dr Smith welcomed the guilty verdict. He says people are entitled to express their opinions, but throwing and rubbing poison on another person has been rightly confirmed by the court as offensive behaviour.
The Nelson Market is actually a wonderful, friendly, weekly event for locals and visitors to Nelson. And this verdict's also important in protecting its reputation as a peaceful place where people of whatever opinion are respected.
Dr Smith, who's been in politics for almost 3 decades and has dealt with a death threat in the past, says he was taken aback by what he described as an ugly incident.
Not just for myself, but also for staff and volunteers that support my presence at the market each week. Nor is it the first time that this debate about poison use in New Zealand has got out of control.
Dr Smith says he admires the steps taken by the new government to further expand National's Battle for Our Birds pest control program. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
Lots and lots of feedback coming in on the nurses' strike. Thank you. 2101 is where most of it's coming to via text. This person says, I'm a nurse of 20 years and don't support the strike. Labor is our only hope of saving the public health system and the nurses are setting them up to fail. Can't nurses just give the government a chance to put it right over the term? Labor can't fix it all in the first year. This listener says, hi John, I'm a nurse on one of Auckland City Hospital's neuro wards. Are you aware of the life preserver services nurses were required to provide today? That's an agreement under the agreement, the strike agreement, that core services, emergency services, life preserver services would be covered by nurses who didn't strike. Well, this person says our ward was fully staffed. It was business as usual. Strike? What strike? We were told that if we didn't provide the required number of nurses to provide LPS, then we were putting the strike in jeopardy, that it would be called off if we couldn't cover the expected numbers. Today has been demoralising. We continue to go unheard. And finally, this person says, go the nurses. My dad's in Wellington Hospital. He's been getting stunning care from the nursing staff here this week, and he's getting stunning care from an army of volunteers and skeleton staff today. We're just sad that the DHB has spent a fortune on strike-related comms and free parking, which is great, rather than pumping that funding into addressing the nurses' concerns. Obviously, there's a budget somewhere. Go the nurses. Double exclamation mark. Thank you for your texts. They are very welcome, as are your emails, tweets and comments on Checkpoint's Facebook page. Donald Trump, who tweets up a storm, has lambasted his NATO allies, calling them delinquent in their defence spending and accusing Germany of being a prisoner to Russian energy. The US president said they should increase their defence spending immediately and demanded they pay their bills to NATO and stop depending on the US to fund defence for them. But at the summit in Brussels, he saved a special rebuke for Germany, which he claims is totally under the control of Russia. The president has been busy trashing generations of American diplomacy, antagonising and belittling his traditional allies over issues like defence and trade, whilst refraining from criticising Russia itself. The BBC's James Cook reports from Brussels.
In his first 18 months in office, Donald Trump has turned diplomacy on its head, with frequent criticism of American allies and occasional praise for American rivals. The president began the day here at NATO by sharply criticising Germany for failing to abide by an agreement on increasing military spending and for the construction of a controversial undersea pipeline which would double the amount of gas Germany imports directly from Russia. Berlin, he said, was now captive to Moscow.
Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened.
The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, took exception to that, recalling that she had grown up under Soviet domination in East Germany.
Ich möchte aus gegebenem Anlass hinzufügen.
I want to say that I have experience of when a part of Germany was controlled by the Soviet Union. I'm very happy that today we are united in freedom as a Federal Republic of Germany. Because of that, we can say that we make our own independent policies and make independent decisions.
Mr. Trump and Mrs. Merkel met this afternoon and discussed the pipeline. Both put a positive spin on the encounter, and all 29 NATO members released a declaration which reaffirmed their commitment to increase military spending, although President Trump said he wanted to go much further. The communiqué was also notable for its forceful condemnation of Russian aggression, including the annexation of Crimea, the use of a nerve agent in Wiltshire, and election interference. The question is, will President Trump take up those concerns directly with President Putin? Some European diplomats worry that he will not. His positions on climate change and Iran, his criticism of the United Nations, and his renunciation of an accord at last month's G7 summit in Canada have all alarmed allies, who harbour a suspicion that Mr. Trump's commitment to the multilateral institutions which buttress the liberal world order is only skin deep.
That's James Cook, the BBC's James Cook in Brussels. Let's head from Brussels to just off the Taranaki coast. The Conservation Minister isn't impressed a mining exploration permit was granted off the Taranaki coast and within a marine mammal reserve. The permit granted to Iron Sands Offshore Mining falls within the West Coast North Island Marine Mammal Sanctuary, which is inhabited, of course, by the critically endangered Maui dolphin and rare southern right whales. But despite the minister, conservation groups and iwi all being against the decision, the government says its hands are tied. How? Why? Charlie Drever reports.
Despite the government saying they were not going to approve any more deep-sea oil and gas exploration permits earlier this year, This mining permit is allowed under the Taranaki Regional Council's coastal plan rules. There are estimated to be between 57 to 75 Maui dolphin left in the wild, and the permit will cover an area that falls 2 nautical miles within the 12 miles that make up the sanctuary, which is designed to protect them. South Taranaki iwi Ngāti Rānui's Debbie Ngārewa-Paka says she is against the decision, as the iwi hasn't had validation best practices taking place.
In one breath we're being told that one part of the ocean is off bounds for extraction, and another part we're being told actually this part of the ocean, which is right smack middle in the middle of a marine sanctuary for Maui dolphins, is open for extraction business.
Debbie Ngārewa-Paka says while the permit isn't directly in their area, sediment plumes will come south into Ngāti Rānui's borders. Greenpeace labelled the permit as absolutely absurd. Its executive director and former Green Party leader, Russell Norman, says he was disappointed but not completely surprised by the decision.
This is a decision by New Zealand Petroleum and Minerals, which is a division of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. And New Zealand Petroleum and Minerals obviously are completely opposed to any action on climate change and are the enemy of biodiversity. So it's not surprising that they have approved this exploration permit. The question is, why hasn't the government stepped in to stop them?
But Russell Norman says all government parties should have an interest in the permit.
I think that a commitment to protecting whales and dolphins would cross the entire coalition government. So we expect the coalition government to take action on it.
Conservation Minister Eugenie Sage says if the permit went across her desk, she wouldn't have approved it.
But it is not a permit that the Minister of Conservation has any say on. It's a permit that's issued by MB. So I'm very well aware of the shortcomings of the Marine Mammals Act. That's why I've asked DOC to do some work in that space. Totally committed to a Taranaki Marine Mammal Sanctuary. There is work being done on that. Have written and advised Minister Woods of the significance of the sanctuary and the importance of Maui dolphin, and I know that she's aware of that, but MB granted the permit.
She says if the exploration permit leads to a request to mine, she would expect the Department of Conservation to get involved. But a spokesperson for Research, Science and Innovation Minister Megan Wood's office says this decision was made under very strict criteria of the Crown Minerals Act, inherited from the previous government. They say there would be a full RMA process with opportunity for consultation if mining rights were applied for. For Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
Goodness gracious, a lot of feedback is coming in on nurses and from nurses. Hi, I'm a nurse who was on strike today. I've nursed for 30 years. Over the past 10 years during our negotiations, we have always wanted safe staffing to be addressed. DHB's always promised they would look at this, and we accepted the MECA in good faith. Nothing ever changed. That's why I'm on strike. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and I joined the nurses, thousands of them marching through downtown Auckland this morning, and safe staffing, which is essentially an increase in staffing numbers, was raised by I think every single person we spoke to. And that is the theme of a lot of the texts we're getting from nurses. We do appreciate hearing from you, 2101. That piece we shot together, Nick Monroe and I, with the nurses, is now available online, I believe. It's coming up to 7 minutes to 6. We've already heard from Donald Trump once tonight. Let's return to him and one of his most controversial policies. All migrant children under the age of 5 who are eligible will be reunified with their parents by Thursday morning US time, which is not terribly far away. However, the Trump administration's promise is being met with scepticism from some human rights groups. Can they achieve it? Reuters' Grace Lee reports.
55 días de no verlo. He had 55 days of not seeing him.
Those 55 days, Javier says, were the worst days of his life. He was reunited with his 4-year-old son in New York after their journey from Honduras ended in separation at a bridge along the Texas border.
They had told him that someone might have adopted his child at this point, and that he would not be able to see him again.
According to the Trump administration, more families will be reunited like this on Thursday. An official told Reuters migrant children under the age of 5 who are eligible will be returned to their parents. But that announcement's being met with skepticism from rights groups, who point out the government's already missed the deadline. A federal judge had ordered the administration to reunite those children by Tuesday. These families were separated under Donald Trump's zero-tolerance policy, and the government has been shifting its estimates of the number of children it would reunite ever since coming under pressure to ease that policy a few weeks ago. The struggle to track and match parents with children under 5 suggests an even bigger problem.
I think we're going to be looking at a very different situation with kids 5 and older.
The administration might have more difficulties in meeting a July 26th deadline to reunite the remaining 2,000 older children with their parents. U.S. President Donald Trump is blaming Democrats in Congress. He took to Twitter on Wednesday, complaining about what he says is a broken immigration system. His administration has said the delays are due to the time it takes to run background checks, confirm parentage, and locate parents released from detention. But rights advocates blame the government's poor technology, saying the system designed to track the children just doesn't work.
That report from Reuters. Coming up to 5 minutes to 6. Plans to build a multi-million-dollar accommodation complex in Fiordland National Park have put locals and environmentalists on edge. This is the story that Katrina referred to in the 5:30 headlines as creating a stir. The proposal is the brainchild of Path New Zealand, which is run by the granddaughter of tourism pioneer Les Hutchins, who founded Real Journeys, one of the country's biggest tourist operators. Because it's in a national park, the Department of Conservation was required to give public notification of the application, which it did earlier this year. Tess Brunton reports on a brewing stoush.
Nestled in the tranquil Eggleton Valley in Fiordland National Park lies the proposed site of the new lodge. And while the exact cost of the build is unknown, a stay is expected to cost $300 per night. With 6 main buildings, including 4 pods each, with 5 private rooms gazing out at the steep Rocky Mountains, up to 40 guests could stay per night. The lodge is meant to embody Path New Zealand's vision to help people engage with nature in a meaningful way. But for some, the design does not evoke tranquility at all. Federated Mountain Club's president, Peter Wilson, has called for DOC to reject the proposal.
Public land, like national parks, isn't usually available for private profit. And in this case, these guys are trying to get exclusive possession of a piece of New Zealand's heritage in order to make money.
Mr Wilson says the proposal is inconsistent with the Fiordland National Park Management Plan that states that new accommodation should be built outside of the park. He says it doesn't matter if changes were offered, he doesn't want a bar of it.
It's a dangerous precedent because once we build one of these, there'll be 10 or 20 or 50 other developers wanting to build these inside of our national parks. It's a sensitive area, it's sensitive from landscape, it's well valued for a sort of tranquil remote fishery experience by the fishing community, and fundamentally it will also just result in urban sprawl along a scenic highway.
Mr Wilson says some Te Anau residents are opposed as it would take business out of the town. Forest and Bird Otago Southland Regional Manager, Sue Maturin, questioned why the lodge couldn't be built somewhere else. She says the proposal will alienate the public from the land.
Building the lodge and the associated infrastructure, it's going to clear some forest and it's going to introduce a whole new settlement much deeper into the park. And there's already a older, smaller settlement and some private land that's on the edge of the park where a lodge could go. So there's no need for the lodge to modify a wilder part of the park.
However, Path New Zealand founder Abby Hutchins remains confident the proposal will be approved. Speaking to RNZ while travelling in Australia, Ms Hutchins says it will help manage the flow around Milford Sound, the country's top tourist attraction.
I think the issues are more about how can we actually develop something that is in keeping with the values of the national park, and do that sustainably and do that well so that more people can actually get out there and experience what the park's got to offer.
If successful, Ms Hutchins plans to meet with Ngāi Tahu and DOC every 5 years to ensure the development is sustainable. In a written statement, DOC says so far the application has been found to be consistent with legislation. But the proposal looks likely to attract heated debate in a hearing in August after submissions close tomorrow. For Checkpoint, Ko Tess Brunton, Tēnei.
Thank you, Tess. It's 2 minutes to 6. I'm just going to change the subject on the feedback because we're getting a lot of feedback on the discussion that Patrick O'Mara was having with us about the CEOs that have signed up to doing better work on climate change. This from Donna. Kia ora, John. Kia ora, Donna. Great to hear of the business groups that have come together to look at their emissions and support each other. Walking the talk is the only way now as we're in the latter days of rescuing our world from collapsing on its inhabitants. However, Fonterra know already how they can stop using coal. They've been provided with all the information inclination they need to transition to wood burning, using mainly the slash that has been so troublesome up north in the floods, and also, of course, on the east coast. A study has to be done to show that, study has been done to show this is entirely possible in the regions of the South Island that needed also fewer cows and better attention to the quality and diversification of products. So that's about Fonterra. Lynn wants to address KiwiRail. So I believe KiwiRail are putting their weight behind reducing the carbon footprint of New Zealand business. So they're contributing to the cause by buying Chinese diesel locos and mothballing the electrification of the NIMT, which is the North Island Main Trunk Line, KB, I believe. Seems a bit of a dichotomy, methinks, says Lynn. Thank you for your feedback. A lot of it tonight. We have to say, a huge amount of feedback on the nurses and their strike action today, and it is overwhelmingly in support of the nurses. Much of it is from the nurses in support of themselves, but those of you who aren't nurses are supporting them by a very substantial majority. It's nice to hear from you. Thank you. You can always text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget, we are on Facebook, where you can actually watch us, which means that in 5 seconds from now, you can see Katrina Batten.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten aho. A striking nurse says her unqualified sister working in a factory gets paid more than she does. Thousands of nurses have been protesting today to mark the country's first nursing strike in nearly 30 years. Up to 30,000 nurses walked off the wards at 7 o'clock this morning in a 24-hour strike over staffing shortages and poor pay. The Auckland nurse who was marching today told Checkpoint with John Campbell that she gets about $27 an hour.
I have a sister that's working in a factory line that's on $30 an hour, and she's not qualified whatsoever. I've had to work hard for my qualifications. I have to work hard with placements. I give of myself freely before I become a nurse. So I've worked hard and I'm just not being compensated.
A striking nurse. The Chief Medical Officer at Wellington's Capital and Coast DHB, John Tate, speaking for all senior staff, is thanking nurses who did turn up to work and also their union for helping plan cover for patients. Dr Tate says hospitals have had more staff and volunteers working today than planned, and for most hospitals, occupancy levels have been at expected levels. The Conservation Minister says if it were up to her, a mining exploration permit would not have been approved off the Taranaki coast. The permit, which was granted to Iron Sands Offshore Mining Limited, falls 2 nautical miles within a marine mammal sanctuary that's home to the critically endangered Maui dolphin and the rare southern right whale. Eugenie Sage says she's disappointed, but it's not her decision to make.
I'm very well aware of the shortcomings of the Marine Mammals Act. That's why I've asked DOC to do some work in that space. Totally committed to a Taranaki Marine Mammal Sanctuary. There is work being done on that. Have written and advised Minister Woods of the significance of the sanctuary and the importance of Maui dolphin, and I know that she's aware of that, but MB granted the permit.
Eugenie Sage says if exploration leads to a mining application, then she would expect the Department of Conservation to get involved. Up to 55 jobs will be lost following Nestlé New Zealand's decision to sell some of its confectionery brands. Macintosh's, Herd's, Black Knight and Fabulicious Red Licorice are going to private equity company Quadrant and possibly Lifesavers and Oddfellows. Nestlé New Zealand's Head of Corporate Affairs, Margaret Stewart, says the company will support the workers made redundant at their Wiri-based factory in Auckland.
We're absolutely determined to look after our staff as much as we can. So that means voluntary redundancies, making sure that they have access to a generous redundancy package and also making sure they have access to outplacement services to help them find new roles.
Margaret Stewart. The new manufacturer RJ's intends to offer Nestlé workers who have been made redundant jobs at its Levin factory. The Nelson MP, Nick Smith, says he welcomes a court's verdict on a woman who threw rat poison at him. Rose Renton was today found guilty of offensive behaviour after an incident last September. Dr Smith, who was at the time was Minister for the Environment, said 2 protesters rubbed rat poison on him while he was at his National Party caravan at the Nelson Market. He says people are entitled to express their opinions, but throwing and rubbing poison on another person has been rightly confirmed by the court as offensive behaviour.
I was taken back by this ugly incident, not just for myself, but also for staff and volunteers that support my presence at the market each week.
Nelson MP Nick Smith. Renton says she stands by what she did as a symbolic protest about large-scale poison drops in wildlife areas. Samoa's Director General of Health says he wants to restore confidence in the country's health system after the sudden deaths of 2 infants. The 1-year-olds died suddenly on Savaii last week after receiving the MMR vaccine that protects against measles, mumps and rubella. The Director General, Leausa Take Nasiri, has led a team to Savaii to conduct post-mortems. He says efforts to restore confidence include stopping all MMR vaccinations.
Vaccination is like a mainstay of prevention here in Samoa for most infectious diseases, and that confidence has been compromised. We want to be transparent as much as possible to our public so that we can regain their confidence in our system and the service we provide for our country.
Leausa Take Nasiri says a vaccinologist from the World Health Organization has arrived in Samoa to assist with inquiries into the deaths. He says doses will be analysed that remain from the vial containing the vaccine that was given to the infants. A young Nelson woman has presented a petition with more than 2,000 signatures to the government to save the city's Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services unit. Zoe Palmer says she's concerned about the government's plan to amalgamate the youth and adult crisis teams, which she says would be a backward step. The 18-year-old says the proposed combination runs contrary to the government's inclusive goals for the youth mental health sector. The petition was presented to Labour MP Paul Eagle and Green MP Gareth Hughes, who say Ms Palmer's work is inspirational. It's 6:05. Sport. The New Zealand tennis player Michael Venus says Denmark's Frederik Nelson and Britain's Joe Salisbury will be a tough challenge in tonight's Wimbledon men's doubles semi-finals. Venus and his South African partner Raven Klaasen are coming off a tough 5-set quarter-final win, but the Kiwi player is confident they have the game to reach the title match.
They're playing well. Everyone is to be at this stage of the tournament. You know, we're going to need to go back to the drawing board and focus on our things and just go about the match and then make adjustments throughout it where we need to.
Michael Venus is also scheduled to play his mixed doubles quarter-final overnight. He and Katarina Srebotnik are up against the third seeds. Tonight's women's semi-finals, singles semi-finals have 7-time champion Serena Williams up against German 13th seed Julia Gerges, while 11th seed Angelique Kerber of Germany faces 12th seed Jelena Ostapenko of Latvia. The NRL is proposing a revamp of the International Rugby League calendar over the next 4 years. The proposal includes an Oceania Cup involving New Zealand, Tonga, Samoa and Fiji, and a Four Nations tournament involving New Zealand, Australia, Tonga and Samoa. Talks have also begun for an International Nines tournament at the end of the 2019 season. And the New Zealand golfer Ryan Fox is looking to back up his runner-up finish in Ireland last weekend when he tees off in his first round at the Scottish Open just after midnight tonight. Fox, who's qualified for next weekend's Open Championship, has risen to 13th in the European Tour's season standings. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Ballance has a whale of a tale, or possibly a tale of a whale, or maybe both during our changing world. You've got one last chance to enjoy Simon Morton's Sonic Delights on the radio, and this week's cultural ambassador is our man of modern dance, Chris Janidis, who's bringing an administrator with him, although there's nothing financial about it.
Elon Musk is very unhappy that his offer was refused, isn't he?
But this is often the problem with extremely well-educated, very successful when they're young billionaires, particularly in the tech sector. They really do know everything, and they've been proven to be right so many times that it's quite hard to say, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work, because they've fended off accusations that they're barking at in the past, and they'll do it again.
That's Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including the central North Island high country. Fine spells and isolated showers. Areas of fog tomorrow morning. Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Fine at first. A few showers developing this evening and becoming more frequent tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, cloudy periods and isolated showers clearing from Wairarapa by evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington, increasing fine spells today, however cloud increasing tomorrow with showers from afternoon. Marlborough and Nelson, fine and cloudy periods. Bulla to Fiordland, mainly fine today, but cloudy periods and isolated showers north of the glaciers. Widespread showers tomorrow. Canterbury to Southland, mainly fine with morning frosts, and the Chatham Islands, fine spells and a few showers today. It's almost 9 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Thousands of nurses left wards and took to the streets today protesting for better pay and staffing. Pickets and rallies took place at hospitals around the country in the first nurses' strike in nearly 3 decades. Hospitals felt the pressure but appear to be coping. In fact, we've been hearing throughout the program that some hospitals had more volunteers and emergency cover on than nurses who are normally rostered in the same wards. We're trying to get confirmation of that from the hospitals themselves. It will be fascinating if that is the case. But looking at the picture across the country, here's our health correspondent, Karen Brown.
Up to 50 nurses braved chilly weather in Wellington to wait outside Wellington Hospital shortly before 7 o'clock this morning to welcome their striking colleagues as they joined the picket. Their ranks swelled to over 100 and strong public support added to their jubilant mood. Registered nurse Katrina Hopkinson, who works in post-anaesthetic care at Wellington Hospital, says safe staffing, or the lack of it, is a major worry for nurses.
The time is now, and we'd rather be on our wards doing our work today and not out here on the picket line. We want a fair and reasonable offer that we can accept and get on with our job.
The Nurses Union delegate thinks there's enough money for their offer to be boosted.
We know that the government has a surplus and there is more money. We don't want more than what is fair and reasonable, and we're saying the time is now. We can't wait for 2020 for safe staffing, and we can't wait for 2020 for a decent pay rise.
And it's short staffing that's on the mind of Wellington nurse Leon.
We've got busier and busier as time has gone on, and it's been feeling more and more unsafe as time has gone on.
Stephanie Watts, who's nursed for more than 40 years, joined thousands of people to march up Queen Street in Auckland. She says the extra $38 million that DHBs have promised for 500 new nursing staff is pitiful.
$886 million to Mycoplasma bovis, $100 million to America's Cup, $2.3 billion for the 4 defence planes, ACC flush fund of $607 million, and we're at the bottom of the heap at $38 million.
In Christchurch, a patient, Jamie Carter, was outside the city's hospital watching the action. He says the wards are quiet.
Yeah, it's pretty laid back and there's not much nurses around, but yeah, hopefully the staff should be more staff on tomorrow here to help out the patients.
But nurses clearly had a lot on their minds.
A few conversations going around with the nurses and all about what's going on today, and yeah.
A Christchurch nurse, Roger Stahl, says he was better off working in Australia.
It certainly helps if you've got that, you're getting paid for what you're worth for. I think the income I was getting, I've been back 11 years, I was getting more there now than I am here 11 years ago.
Hawke's Bay had to call on the union today to provide 4 extra nurses to help it manage a full hospital because of winter ailments and other demands. DHBs have confirmed another hospital also needed to call in more staff but refused to name it. Otherwise, it says all hospitals have coped well given the circumstances. It's estimated up to 8,000 elective procedures were deferred due to the strike. Neither the Nurses Union nor the DHBs will say when talks will resume in the long-running dispute. Union spokesperson C. Payne says whether they strike again will be up to members.
We'll be sitting down, talking with our members, talking with our delegates, key delegates and the bargaining team, early next week.
The DHB's lead chief executive, Helen Mason, says they'll be talking to nurses soon about the recommendations from the Employment Relations Authority facilitator.
DHBs are going to be considering those recommendations, and we will be making contact with NZNO to talk about the recommendations and to agree a path forward.
But with the government adamant there's no more money in the kitty to boost the offer and thousands of nurses convinced they're still undervalued, it's not clear what that path is going to look like. Mō te hotaka o te ahi ahi, ko Karen Brown tēnei.
Julie Dick is a neonatal intensive care nurse. She's worked for the Auckland District Health Board for 24 years. And she told our reporter Nita Blake-Person this morning she's had enough.
The key issues are, I was just talking to an NZNO rep and I said one of my key issues isn't actually for my MECA, for my employment agreement, one of my key issues is not safe staffing, because that to me is like going to a second-hand car dealer and saying, can I have a car with 4 wheels instead of 3? It should be a given. My employment agreement should relate to me, my employment, how much money I make, how I graduate through the levels. I'm quite high up in the levels. I've got nowhere else to go. I see the young lungs come in, struggle up, leave, overworked, go to Australia, go and earn 32% more than you can earn here. Go do it. Would I want either one of my daughters to be nurses? Definitely not.
So you're not going home to sleep today?
No, I'm not going home to sleep today. I'm going to go home and have a shower and a cup of coffee and some toast, and then I'm going to go back into town on the bus and march up Queen Street.
Why is that important?
It's important that people see that this actually matters. It matters at the end of the day. We've been undervalued as a workforce for years and years and years. And if you look at something, or if you even know that the Resident Doctors Association is currently negotiating the registrar's new Mecca, I don't know why they're bothering, because apparently there's no more money. But there will be. There is enough money in healthcare. It is just atrociously attributed.
Julie Dick, neonatal intensive care unit, talking to Nita Blake Person. A lot of feedback coming in. We've been talking about the fact that people are telling us that the cover in some hospitals, volunteers and emergency cover, is greater than the rosters that are normally on. We've had another example of that. Just to reassure the public, life-preserving units in our North Island Hospital, HBDHB, Hawke's Bay District Health Board, has been better staffed than normally and staffed at a level which we want to see permanently. I've worked in hospitals in New Zealand in acute areas which have been unsafe and without relief, no meal break. This is common, I am sure, throughout New Zealand. So another example today of the fill-in staffing being greater than the usual staffing. So much feedback coming in. Hi, John. We cannot afford not to have well-paid, well-qualified nurses and midwives, especially as we have a high need and ageing population. If we are committed to this and we don't have enough money in the kitty, those of us who can afford it may need to pay more income tax to cover this, says Winnie. I don't think that's the acting Prime Minister. Hi, John. Nurses who work in primary health care outside hospital settings, there are 5,000 of us, are thoroughly behind our hospital colleagues and support totally their way overdue need to strike. We want them to know we've been on the picket lines and asked them to stick to their requests, as they will never get another chance. It's a nonsense that the government haven't got the funds to sort this now. These nurses have put up with a diabolical situation for far too long. And a quick one, support nurses, drop 2 Poseidons. We don't need that much for surveillance and certainly don't need to indulge Australia or the US. Now, they are a representative sample of the texts and feedbacks we have been getting, very, very much in support of the nurses' strike. Thank you all. It's coming up to 17 minutes past 6. To Thailand now, where authorities have released the first video footage of the wild boar football team since their rescue. The footage shows the boys in remarkably good nick, but in isolation in their hospital beds. It comes as Thailand's Navy SEALs also released footage from inside the cave showing where the rescue was taking place. Rosanna Philpott from Reuters reports.
It's the first footage we've seen of them since the rescue. All 12 boys safely in their hospital beds, looking thinner but fine and reunited almost with their families. They're in quarantine, the glass divider a precaution. Doctors say infections could have been picked up in the cave. Some have already been diagnosed with lung conditions. They were in there for 9 days before they were even found, sitting on a ledge in a dark, half-flooded chamber with dwindling oxygen. They'd ventured several kilometres inside the cave complex in Thailand's Chiang Rai region after soccer practice with their coach. Thai officials say it was an accident and that no one is to blame. An unprecedented international 2-week mission followed. The rescuers have now released this footage showing how it happened and the complexity of it. The boys were taught to dive when some couldn't even swim. Then, tethered to expert divers, they were guided through the narrow, submerged and dangerous tunnel system. Thai Navy SEALs, police, volunteers, the military. The heroes in this story. On Wednesday, an official thank you from Thailand's Prime Minister for Thai-led efforts and the support and friendship of countries worldwide. It's a happy ending to a story that's gripped the world. On Tuesday, a Google search for the words Thai cave rescue revealed over 350 million results. The good news even caught the attention of audiences at the Soccer World Cup in Russia, with players from several countries tweeting words of support. The FIFA president had even invited the boys as his guests to the World Cup final if they made it out in time. But with at least 10 days more in hospital and a month of recovery at home, that may be an offer they'll have to take him up on at the next tournament.
Rosanna Philpott from Reuters. Hawke's Bay Hospital DHB Coronary Care Unit has 3 nurses tonight, usually 2 nurses. That is a text we've just received. That is a recurring theme, that the emergency cover and the volunteer cover is greater than the normal roster. Now, it could be that the emergency and volunteer cover is not as experienced and not as familiar with the wards as the normal cover is, and so more people are required. Or it could be implicitly admissions from the DHBs that they don't have enough nurses on. It's absolutely fascinating how many hospitals we're hearing from now where the cover seems to have been greater than the standard roster. Thank you all for your feedback. We will make calls to try and get to the bottom of what's behind this. It's coming up to 20 minutes past 6. Mike Moore once talked about lamb burgers. Listeners who were in New Zealand at the time will almost certainly remember it. 3 decades on, many of our biggest exporting industries still do much of their processing overseas. Forestry offers a striking example. We export an increasing percentage of our wood as raw logs, increasing, not decreasing, which means we're missing out on jobs here in New Zealand, and the valley jobs add to the economy. And now we can add merino to that category too, where New Zealand once had a large wool processing industry. We now almost exclusively farm it. It's turned into yarn, fabric and clothing primarily in Asia, which of course raises concern around ethical treatment of workers and, again, the jobs that we're not doing here. How do we ensure that wool we're exporting isn't ending up in sweatshops? Who's keeping an eye on this? Zach Fleming wanted to find out, so he travelled to Vietnam earlier this year, courtesy of the Asia New Zealand Foundation, for a series of stories. One of these was a visit to a New Zealand-based merino company that's recently moved its manufacturing there. But first, his story starts at the beginning, in the South Island.
Hey, Phil. Willie, Phil. Oh, Willie, Poppy, come here.
Double Hill, Canterbury, almost literally the middle of the South Island. No cell phone reception, a visit to the supermarkets, a 2.5-hour round trip, and more than 500 metres above sea level it can drop to -15 in winter. Hard for humans, but perfect for merino sheep.
So this wool here is sort of 15.5 microns. Human hair is about 60 microns, so it's very minute, I suppose.
So this is a quarter the width of a human hair?
Basically, yeah.
15 microns is close to as good as it gets. Paul Ensaw's merino is classed as super fine.
There's been a lot of people move away from merino just because it's easier animals to farm, really, you know. I always think of a merino farmer, they're just kind of like a craft brewer, you know. You've got to really focus on what you're doing and get everything right through the year. So if you use having a lamb, that might put pressure on her and result in lesser quality fibre being produced. So I think just the focus you've got to have and the attention to details a lot higher.
When you get it right, you get merino that's so fine it can be woven with silk, but still strong enough that it doesn't break when you pull at it. New Zealand merino is widely regarded as the best in the world. We're the 3rd biggest producer of it. Paul took over the family farm from his parents. Their property is at the end of Ensaw's Road and now produces around 25,000 kilos of merino a year, 50% more than it did just a few years ago.
We've invested heavily in the farm, and in the last 3 to 5 years we've probably invested over $500,000 to do that.
He's banking on the price of high quality merino staying strong. He sells his for around $28 a kilo at the moment. But almost none of it is processed here. Paul's sheep are due to be shorn at the end of July. It'll take just 10 days to shear all 6,000. And then this merino will be shipped primarily overseas. Paul's is very high quality fibre, so most of it will end up in Italy. Almost all of our merino is exported raw, so where does it go, and is it handled ethically? One of our biggest overseas processors is Designer Textiles, which was founded in Otara in Auckland in 1965. It used to process in New Zealand, but was bought out by South Korea's outdoor apparel giant Youngwon Corporation, and then finalised its move to Vietnam in 2016.
When we had manufacturing in New Zealand, it was meaning that the product was then having to come back to New Zealand, which would then go back to the supply chain, you know, in terms of garment manufacture, which is in Asia. So, you know, it wasn't just cost, you know, it was travelling all around the world.
CEO Brett McIlride says Designer Textiles, or DTI for short, used to send merino to Asia to be spun into yarn. Then the yarn would come back to New Zealand, where DTI would make it into fabric, and then the fabric would be sent back to Asia to garment manufacturers.
Somewhat illogical. So now we've cut out a component of that in terms of, you know, the return to New Zealand. And it was obviously sad to see, you know, this facility shut after such a long history in New Zealand. But the reality is, you know, just to be efficient and cost, lead time, etc., it was logical that it moved that way.
So now all of its fabric is made here, in Nam Dinh, an hour and a half south of Vietnam's capital, Hanoi, in a huge textile and garment industrial park that employs nearly 9,000 people. 162 of those are with DTI, which occupies 3 sheds, each around the size of a large supermarket. All workers are given free lunch and health checks and paid a living wage. Conditions are first world. Simplified, what DTI does is
getting a yarn, knitting it, applying colour to it, and then you know, selling it as a finished fabric to the garment contractor.
the finished product's 60-metre rolls of fabric, like these ones. It could be 100% merino or it could be a merino blend, but it averages around $15 per metre. And with more than 14,000 rolls of fabric in this warehouse, that means there's more than $17.5 million worth of fabric just here. DTI's business has flourished since moving to Vietnam. It's now booked out up to 9 months in advance.
The raw material to us, when it comes into our facility, is in yarn form, so it's as someone would have a ball of wool. It's not quite like that, but in a yarn form, and then we knit it. So we have machines in place, high-speed knitting machines that we knit the fabric.
More than 70 knitting machines make one roll of fabric every half hour, and all of it's inspected by humans. People whose job it is to sit and watch fabric roll by. At this point, to anyone not in the industry, it all looks the same. Rolls of white fabric inside black plastic bags. Because undyed merino goes yellow if it's exposed to light. Dyeing is the most difficult part. Colours are tested and then retested until perfect, in heat and humidity controlled labs. Because once a colour's locked in, sometimes tons of fabric is dyed at once. The dyeing process takes anywhere from 6 to 19 hours, depending on whether it's 100% merino or a blend. After that, it has to be washed, softened, dried, and then cut, set, and stretched into the right dimensions. And then at the very end, depending on the client, complex patterns can be digitally printed, thanks to new technology. The fabric is then driven just 200 metres across the compound to factories like this one, where it's made into garments for some of the world's biggest outdoor sportswear companies. And that's why its business has flourished since moving to Vietnam. Where it used to bounce its merino all around the world, now it just moves it across the compound, which also makes it incredibly easy to ensure working conditions are up to standard. We can't tell you what clothes are being made in this factory, but Checkpoint is the first media organisation to be allowed to film in it. Staff weren't given a heads up we were coming. Security tried to stop us at first, but the head of the industrial park allowed us entry. There are hundreds of seamstresses in this warehouse, but there's room for hundreds of seamstresses. Conditions looked good, and we were told wages are around 1.5 times the minimum wage of around 250 New Zealand dollars a month. Much of this is a result of companies like ZQ Merino, which enforces standards for farmers here in New Zealand and then ensures standards stay ethical further down the line too. Both DTI and Paul Ensor use ZQ.
When we're supplying through that, we're pretty assured that the people further down the chain are going to care just as much and provide a good product for the consumer.
So while it's not processed here in New Zealand anymore, there is still an element of control. Paul is gearing up to share in the next few weeks, and then he's off to a conference in Australia to upskill, not content with wool 1/4 the width of a human hair. And in his backyard that looks like a tourism advertisement, he tells me he's confident merino will continue to grow.
Everyone's looking for natural products, aren't they?
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And Zach travelled to Vietnam courtesy of the Asia New Zealand Foundation. You can watch that story and there's 2 others about 2 young New Zealand women helping save Vietnam's under threat moon bears and a World Vision Aid project on our website, where you can watch all the stories we do. Thank you. And actually the footage, a beautiful footage in that from New Zealand, was shot by Nick Monroe, who's the same cameraman who I was out on the streets with in downtown Auckland today. Delightful chap, brilliant at his job, joy to work with. Automotive engineer to end the program with tonight. He says, I support workers entirely, but I dream of earning $27 an hour. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Almost halfway into the unprecedented strike by nurses, hospitals say they're coping well. The Conservation Minister says if it was up to her, a mining exploration permit would not have been approved off the Taranaki coast. Nelson MP Nick Smith has welcomed the guilty verdict for a woman who threw rat poison at him. Up to 55 jobs will be lost in Auckland following Nestlé New Zealand's decision to sell some of its confectionery brands. An official from the World Health Organization has arrived in Samoa to help with inquiries into the deaths of 2 babies after MMR vaccinations. And a young Nelson woman has presented a petition with more than 2,000 signatures to the government to save the city's Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services Unit. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Alongside an ageing population comes growing loneliness and social isolation.
It's like a great big empty void.